bookshop. It's the bookshop. It's the bookshop of Beverly Farms.
Howdy, everybody. It is Sam Feifel, your host of your favorite little podcast about reading, literature, writing, bookstores, and all things awesome. I'm here, as always, with my co-owner of the bookshop of Beverly Farms, my sister, and someone who has been wearing Patagonia pullovers ever since I've known her, Miss Hannah Harlow. How are you doing today, Hannah?
Oh, I'm good. It is a little chilly this morning. We had some snowflakes.
Yeah.
So I got a little bundled up.
It is absolutely 100% cold season now. Summer is over. Fall is fleeting. I would say that we are now well past peak here in Maine. I'm not sure what you're doing in Massachusetts. You might be peaking right now. I'm not sure.
We're just past peak, so it's still, kind of pretty. I mean, it's still very pretty, but you can see we're close to being done.
We had a very good season up here for foliage. It was beautiful.
Oh, it was so beautiful.
Fantastic. Yeah. And now I have a fire going in the stove. It is officially cold and no more will our summer cares be spoken of. We are firmly into winter reading season. I actually have quite the heavy agenda today.
Wow.
As you know, my daughter is studying to be a philosophy professor. And so I have a number of philosophical themes to discuss with my books today. On my agenda,
that's exciting.
On my agenda, one is The Other Valley, which I know you read and was written by a PhD in philosophy.
You just read that?
I just read it.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
University of Toronto, a guy named Scott Alexander Howard, who may be a better philosopher than writer. Who knows? Also, on the backside of that, I was inspired by your little Instagram video about comfort books. So I pulled out one of my all-time favorites, Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire.
Ooh, interesting.
I'm very pleased that I pulled it out. It's been a while since I read it, and I'm very happy about it. And this is not a book, but the family and I went and saw The Wild Robot over the weekend. So,
movie based on a book.
Correct. I had some thoughts on the adaptation. What is on your agenda?
Well, I'm a little unprepared this week, just going to be frank with you. It's been wildly busy. And I do know I'm talking about Blood Test by Charles Baxter.
Wow.
New novel that just came out. And then, I've been reading a couple books that don't come out until next year. But I just remembered that a while ago, I read a book called Colored Television by Danzy Senna, and I could try to talk about that. That came out in September, and let's see how well I remember it.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. So why don't we start with The Other Valley, which I know you were a big fan of. You really liked The Other Valley, as I recall.
I really liked it. I did do the audiobook. I thought it was a great audiobook. I thought there were some moments that maybe were a little slower than others, but overall, I thought it like blew my mind in a good way.
Interesting. I didn't have any problem with the pacing, really.
Okay,
I definitely read it. It's the sort of book that I did go back a couple chapters every once in a while because I had to confirm what had been described because for people who don't know, it is something of a time travel book.
Yes.
And actually, I think when we talked about it, we sort of talked about it as not really a time travel book because kind of you stay in one place while, there is different times on the left and right of us. The idea is that we are in a mythical world where there is some sort of infinite set of valleys where you are in this valley, which has a lake and a town. And over on the west is 20 years previous, exactly the same. And on the east is 20 years later, exactly the same. And as you can imagine, travel between these valleys is very tightly regulated because you can just go messing up other people's valleys like crazy should you travel back and forth. And so, I guess what the central problem I had with it is I think it works as like a philosophical sort of exploration of I guess it's like regret, right? I think is the sort of core exploration, right? Like if we had it all to do it over again, what would be those things that we would really focus on and actually try to change? Which are the things that we would sort of just be okay with or whatever, right? And so in this valley, they have come up with a body to adjudicate such questions, right? So, who are the people who deserve to go back in time, and who are the people who deserve to go forward in time to like change something about their lives, I guess.
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, it's not just who deserves it, but like, when is it okay because you're actually not going to mess anything up?
Right. Yes, but there's always a risk, right? The sort of calculation is always deserve versus risk, right? So you can have a big deserve, but if you have also a big risk, sorry, you're not going to go, whatever it happens to be. And when I was first reading it, I was actually like, oh, wow, is this YA? Because the whole first book is all the teenagers, and it reads very YA for a while, right? Like, I kind of, I thought this girl was going to get a job with the adjudicating body and like sort of be the best at it, right? I didn't know where it was going. And so I really enjoyed the pivot, right? I won't tell people what the pivot is, but I really enjoyed the pivot, right?
I love the pivot. The pivot surprised me. Yeah.
It surprised me and I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, good decision. That was fun, And
there's another pivot later.
Right. But I just don't think the world building works, right? Like he makes all these decisions in the world building where I'm just like, how does that work? Like, I don't know if you noticed, but like everybody's constantly like using chamber pots and like going to the bathroom outside. And yet they have...
I don't remember that. That's so funny.
And yet they have...
Why? Yeah.
I don't know. And they have buses and pistols. And so I'm like, okay, they have technology, but they haven't figured out indoor plumbing. I see. Okay, that's how that works, I
don't remember that. It's hilarious.
Yeah. And it's like, so they have like the world building there were so many times where I was like, what? That just doesn't make any sense. Like I don't understand how that's the way the universe works, And also like, just the scale never worked for me. I was like, well, how big is this valley? So there's like a bus manufacturing plant in this valley, but I can walk one side to the other. And, like it just, and so there are times where I was taken out of it too much. And I was like, oh, I'm reading a philosophical thought piece. I'm not reading a novel. Those times I was just like, I'm bothered, right? Like I like philosophical thought pieces, and I'm going to talk to my daughter about this. And I think
I gave it to your daughter, by the way, for Christmas, I think last year.
Yeah. She didn't read it. Sorry.
Or her birthday. I gave it to her birthday or something. Maybe she left it.
I thought you gave it to Kristen.
I gave it to Ruby because it's written by a philosopher, and I wanted her to be like, look, you could write a novel too. And like, also, this is a really interesting thought experiment. I agree with you. It doesn't always work. I was fine with it. I just went with it. Like I didn't feel bothered. Also the scale too. You're just like, okay, there's literally just this one. It's just this valley repeating over and over. And that's the whole world. And there are just like 300 people in it. Like,
right. Yeah. It just, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably because I read so much speculative fiction, as we call it now, that like the universe building is like one way that we evaluate those kind of books, And so I guess it's more of like someone dabbling in literature with like a veneer of speculative fiction over top of it. And so maybe like not trying to like play by those rules. But
also, how did you feel about Odile, right? That's her name, the main character.
Yeah.
Like, did you feel like she had an arc and you felt like she was a real well-rounded character or whatever?
So this is one of my flaws in reading, is that I have a hard time believing or identifying with main characters who are just like racked with self-doubt and, like lack of confidence.
It's a good portion of literature.
Well, I know. And so I'm like, always like, just freaking do it. Like what?
Yes.
I like, what is the holdup? And so like, I get that there are people like that. I'm not saying that like it's not believable because of that, but like there are so many times where I'm like, well, why are you suffering this self-doubt? What is the evidence for your self-doubt? You seem to be a highly capable person who does very well, and yet, you're a clown. And so, it just felt too much sometimes like pieces being moved around a board and not like an actual exploration of humanity. Like, like I need a little bit of realism if this is going to be this exploration of humanity. But one thing I thought was really cool is inside the book, they often, inside the sort of narrative, they often referenced these like mythologies. Like they had all these like myths about the foundation of the valleys, or of like how they set up the rules, or how the council was created and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that was really cool because it was like I'm reading a myth inside a myth, and if you read this as like mythology and as like a, Roman god's tale or whatever, then I think it works. But if I were him and I was going to do it over, I would not, like there's just so many choices. Like just don't put a bus in there. We don't need a bus.
Right. We don't need buses.
Just walk downtown, get a horse
or
and
just
buggy,
give them toilets.
Right. Yeah. Or like, why are we pissing outside? Like they piss outside all the freaking time, And there's something in there. I would like to talk to him because everybody's drunk all the time and everybody's constantly pissing outside. And it's like, I think he's trying to make some commentary about this society, like, something about its ephemeral nature. I don't know. But I thought
I'm trying to think if
just a weird choice. I was like, why is everybody pissing outside?
Does someone like ever discover something because they're pissing outside? There are lots of like, they're in the woods and then they see something and then they maybe.
No, I don't think it was ever used as a narrative device, really. But like, like there's this one thing, right? So like there's the guard has to escort the person who's going into the 20 years ago valley, right? And they always stop at this cabin that they've built in the woods, which is the way station for this travel, where the guard takes the person and there's no bathroom there. Like there's a literal part where the person who is traveling, 20 years in the past has to go pee in the woods. I'm like, why would they not put a toilet in this place? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's
or at least like an outhouse so you can guard it.
Right. Yeah. Like there's like no door closing. Like, I just don't get it. I was just like, why? What is this decision? I'm sure he has some reason for it because it can't be that random. Because I'm always just like, okay, they have guns, but no bathrooms. I don't get it.
Yeah.
It's a weird choice. But anyway, so I think because, it's the type of book like that you always say, it sounds like you don't like it. It's not that I didn't like it. Like clearly got me thinking, very energizing, very interesting, a different kind of story that I haven't read. But I just think there are times where I'm just like, what are we doing?
Yeah. I think one of the things I did like about it was it's not just one philosophical question he's exploring. Like there are lots.
Right.
Like as Odile is studying to maybe go into this, advisory committee that you have to get into, like they ask lots of questions about like how the city should operate or whatever.
Yeah.
And then as you go forward, it's just like he kind of keeps coming up against these kind of moral quandaries.
Right. Yeah. I do like books that force us to sort of examine moral philosophy. And I'm going to talk about another one that asks us to do that.
Actually, this is a great book to segue into my book called Blood Test by Charles Baxter. Mm-hmm. So in this book...
I know nothing about this book.
Yeah. The main character... is a dude who lives in Ohio and he's divorced. He has 2 kids. He has a girlfriend. He's an insurance agent, doing pretty well for himself, living a very American Midwestern life. And he has some like stomach pains or something. So he goes into his doc, he's a pretty healthy guy, but he goes to check these out. And the doctor's like, recommends this blood test. This company offers this blood test where it can predict how you're going to act in the future.
Oh. Okay.
And for whatever reason, he decides to take this test. And it tells him that he is likely to like murder somebody.
There's a blood test for propensity for murder. Okay. Yeah. I like it. Yeah.
And he's like this, he goes to church, he teaches Sunday school, he's a mild-mannered guy. He's like, I don't really think I'm going to, that's just not who I am or whatever. But I think it then starts to explore, like, if you know what's going to happen in the future, how does it make you act in the present, which is one of the questions explored in The Other Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And in a lot of, there are other books too that explore this question. I think this one's interesting. It's like, aside from this blood test, which kind of does get explained, we're in, our world or whatever. But there's just like this element of absurdism, like running throughout the book, where just like characters say things you don't expect them to say, like conversations go like a little like off the road. You're like, what is happening? So it ends up being pretty funny.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I read a bit of a Los Angeles Times review that compared it to White Noise by Don DeLillo.
Oh.
And I thought that was a really good comparison. Like it's like kind of these crazy things happening to this like normal quote unquote family.
Right.
And it's like a little bit absurd. It just has a similar tone and like writing style. But I thought it was just really well. Yeah, it was really good. It was really well done. And it gets into like this commentary on America, like about American capitalism and just like mostly American capitalism.
The vacuousness of current mainstream discourse. Yeah.
Yeah. I really liked it. And I was pleasantly surprised. Charles Baxter has written many books, but the other one I've read is The Feast of Love, which came out probably like 25 years ago at this point. I don't
remember that at all. Yeah.
It was a big MFA book. Like, when I did my MFA, it was like one of those books everybody was like, have you read The Feast of Love?
Right.
You felt like you had to read it. And apparently he's written a bunch of others, but I think he's just
Why did you read it? It got pushed to you by a sales rep or what?
Not even, I was going through the catalog and I ordered a couple of copies because when I saw it, I was like, oh, Charles Baxter, like he's like a solid literary fiction guy. Like people know him, right? But then it's kind of,
I have never heard of him.
I just think I feel like he's going to be overlooked. And I went and read some of the reviews and they're amazing. It's very positively reviewed. But I think in like the current, landscape of books and book reviews and where the attention goes, like, I think most people aren't going to hear about this book.
Huh. No, it's interesting.
I think if it came out 25 years ago, it would have been a huge book.
Like big book. Yeah. It's like, he's like a John Irving type that just, we can't get any attention for the John Irving types anymore.
Or the Don DeLillos or whatever.
Or the Don DeLillos, yeah.
I don't know. It's like, it seems like it's a little passé, but it's not passé. Like,
won't anybody think of the white men? What is happening?
Yeah, right. But the craze for romantasy and romance, I'm getting really tired of it, frankly. And it's really not the genres that we sell in the store.
At all.
So, but I do find it then means we're struggling to sell some of the other stuff just because we're the only ones talking about it.
Right.
And when people come, yes, they trust us, but they need reinforcement from other places. Yeah. And so they're just kind of like, you're the only one I've heard this from.
Well, yeah. No, I hear that. I mean, it is white dudes, but it's also anything that is a little bit difficult, like,
yeah,
you see it everywhere. In music, Spotify has rounded off the edges of all music. So everybody's listening to, music to shop by. And, you go on to like Netflix, all the streamers are just like super eye candy, nothing that challenges you or whatever. And the same thing in books is like, everybody wants this, feel good, fun read, because it takes you out of it, which I get. But, we're not challenging ourselves at all with our art. Like art is so safe right now. And so it's so hard to generate any interest in these books if they're difficult to read or if they ask hard questions or, it's just, people aren't engaging with that stuff right now, which I don't blame them sometimes, like there's so much crap that's in your feed that, you don't want something that's like hard or whatever.
Right. A few weeks ago, someone came in and they're like, I want like literary fiction for this, 28-year-old dude I'm buying a gift for. And I was like, I just had this like brain fart. Of like, oh, it's in the store, but I was like, no one's asked me for that for so long. It was really nice. I was like, just give me a minute. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the stuff that I seek out. And, I go and I look at I sit there and stare at the ARC shelf. And there's just sometimes like, I'm like, I don't know which of these books I'm supposed to read. Like none of them look interesting to me.
Yeah. And I will say, the ARC shelf
that's not the best in the...
it's not the best. It's not giving you a wide range of options. It's like, it's whatever the publishers chose to send us. And, I don't necessarily want my reading and what we're selling to be dictated by what the publishers want us to read and sell, frankly. Like, I would like to have some autonomy and make the choices. Obviously, like, we need the publishers' helps.
You got to find a way to read the book in some way.
Right.
But we can wait for them to come out. They don't have to be.
And the publishers are saying these are the books that are going to get review attention and book club picks and whatever. So it is important for us to know what those books are and have them in the store and whatever. But
like I never would have read Prophet Song if it didn't win awards or whatever. I was like, oh, I better read that. Like. There's, some of these, they're just not going to get pimped like that. But so it's a good transition though, because, like I read Interview with the Vampire because it's, in some ways a comfort book for me. I've read basically all of the Anne Rice books, although maybe not the last like 5 years. I don't know if she still writes or not, actually, to tell you the truth. But I loved all the vampire books when they first came out. Interview with the Vampire was first written... I actually didn't look this up, but 1976, right? I wouldn't have guessed that. I thought it was like an 80s book.
Yeah, totally.
And so that means that, I was 1 when that came out and I didn't read it till I was in college probably. So just gives you an idea of how popular those vampire books were. This is a trade paperback that I'm reading. Not even a trade. It's mass market. Yeah. Which is actually very hard to read nowadays. But I have like a bunch of these mass markets. So at one point,
I hate mass markets. Sorry.
I know, but I must have I read these in college, I think, for the first time. So I didn't care about little small writing. I used to read these kind of books all the time. But this is not an easy book, right? Like,
interesting, because it was so popular.
Right. It was so popular, right? But like, and so the Interview with the Vampire conceit actually goes through the whole book, which I didn't remember. Like, the whole book is told by Louis the vampire telling a story to a boy. He's always referred to as a boy, but he's a man of some kind, who is recording the interview on a cassette tape. There are many stoppages where the boy has to change the cassette tape.
Oh my God.
And at one point, Louis the vampire is like, 150 years old. He's like, oh, what a interesting contraption that is, as though it's like the height, it's a little small tape recorder, like, oh, wow, height of technology. But the reason that I was texting back and forth with my daughter over the weekend was not because of the other Valley. It was because of Interview with the Vampire. There's a whole section where he engages on the difference between aesthetic and moral values and whether any aesthetic value can actually be separated from the moral. And he decides in the end that all aesthetic choices are actually moral choices in an interesting way that caused my daughter to believe that he was actually reducing moral philosophy to aesthetic philosophy in an interesting way. Wow. So we've got Anne Rice engaging with like serious moral philosophy questions in a book about vampires.
Wow.
And it is serious, right? Like Anne Rice gets into like, it's this question, right? Okay, you thought killing people is evil and from the devil, but then you discover that vampires exist and then you are in fact a vampire. Does that not change the moral question? If vampires exist and they can only exist via sucking other people's blood, then sucking other people's blood must be morally okay because otherwise God would not have made vampires.
Wow.
So it's not a moral failure to kill. In fact, it's an aesthetic choice as to whether you should kill people or animals. And so he was pretending like he was making an aesthetic choice to kill animals, but really he was making a moral choice.
Wow. Okay.
So,
that is
very interesting, right? And it's like, it's so much harder and more interesting and more detailed and more thoughtful than the mass market stuff that is out today. I will tell you that. Like, this is the Sarah J. Maas of 1976, right? Like, I think. And it is so much deeper. It is so much more textured. It is so much more thoughtful than the stuff that's coming out today. It's like, it's as though Interview with a Vampire, they took out half the stuff. And that's like the stuff you read today in YA. Not that this is YA, but, is there an interesting literary vampire book now? Maybe. I don't know. Something like
maybe. I mean, there might be, because there are a lot of books being written and being published that we just aren't hearing about, because you can't hear about all of them.
No. And, I did read Bram Stoker's Dracula not that long ago. It's free if you have an iPad, you can get it for free in the iBooks. Not that I would tell anybody about that. But so I read all the books that are out of copyright, so you can read
them. They're in the public domain.
On the treadmill,
Yeah.
And Bram Stoker's Dracula is awesome. Like, that's
what people keep telling me.
It's incredible
I need to read
how well it holds up. And this really speaks to it, right? Like, Anne Rice is like really diving into the vampire that Bram Stoker created and playing with it. And, it's amazing how contemporary it seems, because it plays with all of these like vampire ideas. Like, oh, you thought that cross was going to do anything to me? Ha, ha, ha. That's all mythology, And I feel like that joke is like still here 40 years later,
Totally. Yeah.
And so it's just, I'm super impressed by Anne Rice and how well it stands up. Like, obviously there's some technology things, but in terms of just how she's playing with what, she's playing with genre and, stuff that's not taken seriously. And she's working really seriously to make it a substantive book. Highly recommend, if you have not read the Anne Rice, start with Interview with the Vampire. I've heard there's actually, one of the reasons I picked it up too is I heard there's like a series on one of the streamers that's pretty good with Interview with the Vampire. But
yes, I did hear that too. I forget.
I don't know which one it's on, but so that was part of my thinking is, maybe I'll,
right.
But, there's a vampire Lestat. There's, it really, it goes on and on and on. But this is the OG. Highly recommend if you have not read it recently or before.
Okay, cool. I think my next book does kind of fall into a more literary work that is a little bit more difficult, but has some commercial appeal still.
Okay.
Colored television. I said Danzy Souza before for some reason. It's Danzy Senna. I'm sorry.
Danzy
got that wrong.
Senna.
Yeah.
And what's the book called again?
It's called Colored Television.
Okay.
And it is about a woman who is a writer and a teacher. She's been teaching, she's a professor, and she's married to an artist, and they have a couple kids, and they live in LA, and they have no money. They are like, starving artists, totally broke, but they're also like middle-aged and have kids. And they're essentially, they moved out of their most recent apartment, which like the main character hated. It was a dump, because LA is so expensive. But they have this sublet for a year. It's like an old friend who, it was her writing friend, but he went into Hollywood and has become super successful. And he's like on set in Australia for the year. And he's like, oh yeah, use my house. And it's this like beautiful, beautiful house.
Right. Sweet.
So they're playing at being rich for a year, living in this nice place. And she happens to have sabbatical and is trying to finish her novel. So she has published a novel that did pretty well or whatever. But she has a second one that is overdue. It's getting super long. And her husband calls it her mulatto War and Peace. So she is of mixed race, and she's kind of obsessed with like writing about the history of, being mixed race in America. So there's like a lot in there, and it's a very nuanced look at race.
Is it a book within a book? Like, do you get sections of the book?
No, you don't get sections of the book. Anyway, it's a very, like, I don't love uncomfortable readings, like it gets uncomfortable. She makes some very questionable decisions. Like she's lying to people. She's trying to finish this novel.
Is it first person or is it third person omniscient?
I'm sorry, I read it like a few months ago. I don't remember.
But I'm saying, like,
But
so
it's
is she making the bad decisions?
I think it's close third person.
Okay, yeah.
And so she ends up, going to write for this dude in Hollywood, and she's, not being totally truthful about everything. She's not telling her husband, so it's like you're waiting for this all to like come crashing down on her.
Right.
Which of course it does.
Of course it does.
It did in ways that I didn't see coming. So it's a really solid read. It was a little bit more of a difficult read. Like it took me a little bit of time to get through it. The middle, definitely gets a little bit bogged down, but ultimately like things come together. And I thought it was a really good look at like being an artist today, being a parent today, how hard it is to like make good art and get paid for it.
Sure.
And to be married to someone who is trying to make art and also like maybe doesn't care as much about getting paid or is, more faithful to that kind of like true artistry. And so like, what's that balance of like commercial and whatever?
Yeah, it's tough. Artists need to marry accountants. Everybody knows that. So
totally.
If artists can't marry artists, then everybody's broke.
Yeah. Anyway, I think I was interested in the publication of this book kind of after I read it because it was originally, I believe, scheduled for a July publication, and then it got picked for one of the book clubs. Oh. And all of a sudden it was coming out in September. So I kept kind of waiting to talk about it because I was like, when is this book coming out? Like there was a shifting thing going on. So eventually it did come out in September. It was on the bestseller list briefly, I think, the indie bestseller list, because it did.
Oh, I don't remember seeing it. Was it a Jenna pick or what? Yeah,
one of those. Let's see. And it was a Good Morning America book club pick. Oh. But then I felt like it didn't really get that much attention. Like I really didn't hear much about it.
Well, I mean, that might be why, if it's hard to get into, people DNF it after 50 pages and just doesn't get any heat.
Yeah. But I think it did like okay. So.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of pressure on the book club pickers. If you pick a dog, people invest a ton, people invest a ton of money in those. Like they print a crap load because you say you're going to pick it. It's this whole negotiation. And that if it doesn't do well,
I wouldn't call this a dog.
I didn't say this was a dog. I'm saying that's a lot of pressure.
Okay.
If it is a dog, I don't know. Anyway, so you have read The Wild Robot, right?
I actually haven't.
You've never read it?
I know. My older son read it maybe 500 times and told me the whole plot. So I felt like I read it.
Right. Well, so we saw the movie. Gus, my son, read the book. He was saying during the movie a lot of times, I don't think this was in the book. I think this was in the book. I don't think this was in the book. This might have been in the book. I'm not sure. I don't really remember if this was in the book, which was a little annoying. Mm-hmm. I will say that I think it's a DreamWorks. It's not a Disney. I think it's a DreamWorks. And it is beautiful. Absolutely spectacularly, animated or whatever. But people who are looking for the depth and gravitas of The Wild Robot, I don't think they're going to find it in the movie. So as Gus said, like if they had just stuck to the plot of The Wild Robot, it would have like been over in 20 minutes, right? Because like the book moves really slowly, and I think it's only like 100 pages, and there's not very many words on each page or whatever, and there's not a whole lot to it. And I think that's the beauty of the book, is that it's like, it's a robot that, washes up on an island with no people. And the robot has to like navigate the world of the wild and eventually becomes wild and doesn't want to go back to like human. Whatever.
The robot is like the sole survivor of this ship.
Right. Yeah. And so in the movie, they make the robot into this like mother figure for this like baby goose, right? And in the book, like she just kind of gives the baby goose to the other goose and, whatever. Right. And it's much more about how you have to come to grips with the ephemeral nature of life, right? The book is People live and they die. People come into your life and they go. People, it's really about living in the moment, right? Animals don't have regret. They don't have nostalgia. They don't think about the future and worry. They just live in the moment. Everybody's living in the moment. And, sometimes your babies die. Sometimes they don't. And whatever, you're an animal. And the movie just gets so maudlin in the middle and becomes this like celebration of like motherhood and caring and and then it wraps up so tidily. Like there's a choice at the end of the movie where I'm like, don't do that. It's so unnecessary. Don't do that. And then they do it and you're like, oh, like you just took this like cool ambiguity, right? You take this possibility and you just cut it off and say, this is the only way it can end. And it's just like, oh, like why? You didn't have to make that choice, And I guess I get it that it's a PG movie, but it really goes back to the same discussion. Like, I think it's so safe, right? And like you could tell they didn't want to make a movie for kids where, oh, maybe something bad happened at the end. Or maybe it was something good. It had to be something good. And it's like, the whole point of the book is that maybe it's going to be bad, and you have to deal with that. Part of growing up is realizing something shitty is going to happen tomorrow and you're going to have to deal with it. Like it is not going to be awesomeness the whole way through. And I feel like it was just a really missed opportunity. At the beginning of the movie, the robot can't understand all the animals. And I was like, oh man, are they going to have no dialogue in this movie? It would be awesome.
Yeah.
And do they make that choice? No. They like have the robot figure out how to talk squirrel. And it's just like, why? Like it could have been this like beautiful, cool, weird movie where like there's no dialogue. And there's also a fox played by Pedro Pascal, which is the exact fox from Zootopia, right? Like it's like he ripped off Bateman's doing of the fox, It's like so tropey and like it just felt like such a mail-in job by Pedro Pascal. But
bummer.
I mean, it's a good thing to take the family to, can be enjoyed by people of all ages. But I think, obviously the movie's not going to be as good as the book, but I just think they missed the opportunity to like challenge kids in the way that the book did. The reason everybody loves the book is because it's not this like awesome, everything wraps up coolly at the end. People are like, this is a weird story. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Oh well.
So it's kind of a bummer. Is it Peter Brown who wrote them all?
Peter Brown's the author, yeah.
So anyway, if you have like an 11-year-old boy who doesn't like to read, go get him the Wild Robot books and they're going to crush him and it's going to be awesome for you.
Yes.
And then go see the movie.
Which does look really beautiful.
It's very pretty. It's very pretty. I can't say that it's not. Great celebration of the outdoors. They also like there's a bear played by Ving Rhames. I'm just like, stupid bear, get it off my screen.
Anyway, what do you think? Should next time we talk about our favorite books of the year?
Is it next time? No, I think we should talk about what are going to be the big books of the Christmas season next time.
Okay. Sure.
Right? Like we need like some kind of like, we should do a gift. Actually, we'll do a gift episode.
We'll do a gift episode next time.
Yes.
And then after that, it'll be end of November.
Right. That'll require some research on our parts. Are we doing Thanksgiving at your house? We could record a podcast at Thanksgiving.
Maybe. I think we are, but
that might be a little aggressive.
To confirm.
But
yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Mom told me Jason was going to cook Thanksgiving dinner for everybody.
That's what I've been saying. I just haven't actually confirmed that with Jason.
Luckily,
he might listen to this.
Neither of our siblings, neither of our spouses ever listened to this podcast, so we're very safe, especially here late in the show.
Jason does occasionally listen.
Kristen, she's given up.
I just feel like I'm not reading that many more books that have been published in this year, but that's fine.
Right, yeah. Well, we'll just do like a gifty thing. What are the big hot books that you want to get? Also, we do have a very cool event to talk about if you have children or if you're just a child at heart. We have awesome Christmas book writer and illustrator Matt Tavares from the great state of Maine and the great city of Wells. He is going to be here on December 12th.
Saturday,
7th.
December 7th.
The 7th. Okay, the 12th is when my band is playing Lenny's. The 7th is the right date for Matt Tavares. And we're going to be at Hastings House, and Hannah has promised me that there's going to be Christmas cookies. So you should come get Dasher or...
Dasher Can't Wait for Christmas. Those are all now available in a beautiful gift set.
Ooh,
But he also wrote...
what's the one about the two birds? Lulu and Red. Yeah. That one's really great. It's especially if you've been to like New York City in Christmas, it's all about birds that live in the tree at Rockefeller Center. Great story.
Yes.
And he's just a great illustrator and writer in general. He wrote a book about Pedro. He wrote a book about Ted Williams, wrote a book about Babe Ruth. They're all like just awesomely illustrated. And then he has a graphic novel for middle school girls. Yeah. Hoops.
That looks great.
All middle schoolers.
I was going to say my middle school boy read it and really liked it.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying it's about a
girls basketball team. Yeah.
I think it's because his daughter played basketball. His daughter played basketball with Chad Finn's daughter.
Oh, interesting.
They both live in Wells, and their daughters were on the Wells High School basketball team.
That's
which
fun.
I think maybe won the state championship. I don't know. I can't remember.
Anyway, we're
something like that. Also, Spose lives in Wells and is friends with those guys too, and so maybe Spose will come to a holiday event.
Makes more sense why you said maybe Spose will come. I was like, okay.
they all went to Wells High.
Okay. Wrapping this up.
Wrapping up. We also have other like holiday sales and whatnot on the website. You should go and look at our website often. It'll make you smarter. And other than that, we will see you next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.